All right, let's dive right into this. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're cracking open the files on one of the absolute most chilling, perplexing, and frankly enduring mysteries in American true crime. We are looking at a perpetrator who didn't just commit unspeakable violence, but actually waged an outright psychological war on the public, the press, and the authorities. We are, of course, talking about the Zodiac Killer, America's most wanted shadow. And that word, shadow, is absolutely crucial to understanding this entire case. Because, as we're going to see today, it's his ability to strike violently and then just completely vanish that makes this story so uniquely terrifying. I mean, imagine for a second a serial killer who doesn't just strike in the dark and hope to quietly evade capture. Instead, this was someone who blatantly challenged the police. He actively taunted the media and sent these incredibly complex, secret codes straight to local newspapers. For him, it wasn't just about the killings. It was about the spectacle. It was about control. And this deeply unsettling game of cat and mouse he was playing with the entire country. And here is the wildest part. It has been more than 50 years since this reign of terror began. Think about that. Half a century of massive leaps in forensic technology, of endless public fascination, of amateur sleuths digging through the evidence. And yet, the true identity of the Zodiac Killer remains a complete unknown. It's almost impossible to wrap your head around given how loudly he broadcasted his own presence, but it is the cold, hard truth. Part 1, The Terror Begins. To really understand how a mystery like this unfolds, we need to go back to where the panic first started. The terror escalated incredibly fast. It all kicked off on December 20th, 1968, near Vallejo, California, when a gunman opened fire on a young couple parked out on a quiet, remote road. Now, at first, investigators reasonably thought this was just an isolated tragedy. But then, just months later, a second, chillingly similar attack happens with another young couple. And that was the terrifying realization that a serial spree had officially begun. Then, in the weeks that followed, the whole narrative flips completely when local newspapers start receiving a series of highly disturbing letters. Part 2, The Zodiac Speaks. This right here marks some massive turning points where the killer deliberately shatters the silence. This is the Zodiac speaking. Honestly, just hearing that phrase still sends a total chill down your spine, doesn't it? The writer claimed total responsibility for the brutal murders and branded himself with this deeply unsettling name. He wasn't just some anonymous attacker anymore. He had literally given himself a brand, a persona, and a voice that he fully intended to use to terrify the public. And tucked inside those letters was this insanely arrogant ultimatum forced onto the media. Here's how it worked. Step 1, the newspaper receives a strange, completely encrypted cipher. Step 2, his demand. Publish it right on the front page where absolutely everyone can see it. And step 3, the terrifying threat. Refuse to print it, and the killing continues. He was essentially holding the press, the police, and the entire public hostage to his demands. As the months dragged on, the grim reality of how he operated became horrifyingly clear. He targeted totally innocent victims completely without warning and somehow managed to leave the police with almost zero usable clues or trace evidence at the scenes. But what truly shows you his sheer brazenness? In one instance, he calmly picked up a public payphone, called the police directly, and actually reported his own crime to the dispatcher. This was a guy who felt absolutely untouchable. Part 3, Cracking the Ciphers. Because the physical attacks were only half the battle, now we transition into the psychological warfare. So those ciphers he kept sending, they were wildly inconsistent in how complex they were. One of them got solved in just a matter of days, but another one, it sat locked and totally unsolved for more than 50 years. It baffled the greatest codebreakers, military intelligence, and even supercomputers until a decentralized team of international programmers finally cracked the code in 2020. It's a stark contrast that just highlights how erratic his psychological games really were. Part 4, The Ultimate Cold Case. This brings us to the most frustrating phase of our explainer, the investigation itself. Because to this day, the case remains officially open, despite thousands of tips pouring in over the decades, despite countless suspects being investigated, and just an unbelievable amount of man-hours dedicated to the hunt. No one has ever been officially identified as the Zodiac, and it is incredibly important we remember why this matters today. This is not just some neatly resolved chapter in a history book. This is a terrifying, active, open investigation into a literal phantom. So, As we wrap up our analysis of the source material today, we are left staring at a sequence of lingering questions. Number one, the most obvious but somehow the most evasive. Who actually was the Zodiac Killer? Given the sheer volume of his correspondence and his desperate need for attention, the man behind the shadow is still a total blank space. We have police sketches, sure, but we don't have a name. Which brings us right into the second question we really need to ponder. How did he vanish without leaving enough evidence to identify him? In an era where he was physically interacting with victims, handwriting dozens of letters, licking stamps, sealing envelopes, using public phones in populated areas, how is it physically possible for someone so brazen and so arrogantly public to just slip away without a trace? And that leaves us with our final, deeply unsettling thought. Did one of America's most infamous serial killers die without ever facing justice? Did he just age out of his crimes, pass away quietly, and take his horrific secrets to the grave, effectively pulling off the ultimate escape? Well, more than half a century later, the mystery is still completely unsolved. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and I'll catch you next time.